Welcome, everyone, to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. Well, I'm glad to be back, and this week we actually have another topical question show. I'm going to continue it with some current events. What I did was I threw it open to some friends of mine on a forum, on the WebBots forum, which is loosely what inspired the Time Monk Radio, although Time Monk Radio is a separate place. But with our friends on Time Monk, where I do sometimes reading, I ask for question suggestions. And what I wound up doing was actually taking one question from the forum and one question from a different forum, and they both turned out to be kind of complex and ongoing. So basically the show will be about these two questions, which will be in two different parts. I'm going to start with the question from the WebBots forum. And this one involves concern about the drought in the southwestern United States. Being from California, I think I was tending to read mostly for that, although I included the Nevada area in my actual question. I don't feel as strongly drawn in that area, so I was trying to help that person out. I think some of this information also goes for Nevada and the Southwest in general, but I honestly think that I was primarily reading for California. But because this is kind of long and involved, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And the way I phrased the question was this: what are the most important cards and runes concerning the drought in the southwestern portion of the United States, especially in California and Nevada areas for this coming winter and spring, basically 2015 and through, the spring of 2016? And for the answer, I wound up breaking this up into several readings, and this is the general first overall. So in answer to that general question, we get a pattern that will be repeated again and again as we fine-tune down the cards. But I'm going to go over them all the first time in more detail, because some are going to repeat. The first card that starts this out is Birth, which suggests the start of something new, or something that's in the process of starting to happen. This Birth card suggests that we are going in for a new time period and a new situation, and it's followed by the Castle card, which is all about defenses and security. So I think to some degree this suggests that people are going to start feeling a bit more secure for some reason, possibly that sort of change in energy and situation as these things start to change and move over. The middle card is the Work card, which this is the card with cogs and gears, and suggests that a lot of physical and actual work may be done to try and shore things up, to make things more secure, and to make people feel better about their situation and actually help in some way. Although this could also just mean that it looks like there's a lot of work going on, looking busy. It's hard to tell at this point. But however, it's unlikely that the drought is totally over, because the Destruction card is prominent towards the end of this reading, and it's followed by the Liar card. Now, this last card is puzzling because in general you would expect that things would be destroyed or they would not be. Basically, the problems are going to continue either from drought or potentially, given California especially, with rain afterwards. But unless, of course, there were lies or deceptions as to the nature of the destruction and or what is actually destroyed, it is possible that the entire idea of a new cycle is a deception. In other words, we seem to be moving into a new era, but we're really not. But it seems unlikely because of some of the information that's going to come up later as I refine this macro reading down. But this overall sense of lying, distraction, and destruction seems to come after a period of relatively good news and positive feeling. I'm not absolutely certain on that, but to a large degree the cards kind of go in a progression, and I really feel like they're doing that here, time-wise. The runes which follow are also largely positive, and again suggest that new cycle. We first have Gabo, or gift, sometimes even translated as marriage. This card is all about exchange, and about giving and receiving, especially in an equal manner. It's also associated, because of the ancient ideas of marriage, with transactions and exchanges of property and land, and also contract, real estate. In other words, a lot of things that you would see that are being affected by bad weather or by the long-term drought. Berkano comes next, and it's the birch tree or the birth rune. So effectively, we begin with the birth card and end with the birth rune. So it seems that at the very least, something new is coming onto the scene. It may or may not be a false start. I can't tell you yet, and I'm not sure. But a new element is definitely going to show up in terms of this drought by the end of the spring of 2016. And I think it's going to be a lot earlier. It almost looks like something new comes into play that changes how people view what's happening. But the situation may not really change in the long run as much as it seems. That could be a good thing or not, depending on what the new thing is. So, because this reading was just so convoluted and so strange with the positive and then the lying and destruction, I thought this is a great reading to break down, because, we want to see, can we get some more information? Can we get this clearer? And the first question I decided to ask was, well, what is the nature of destruction? Because that's really important. And now it gets really interesting, because honestly, the cards bring in an angle that I should have thought of, but did not. I was really expecting a different sort of answer than the one that came up, because, the one that comes up makes sense, and it doesn't totally pin everything down neatly like I was hoping it to, but it takes us into some interesting territory. Now, I'm going to tantalize you with that, and I'm going to go back and now go over the cards directly. The first card is the yes card. Now, this card means that the card after it usually gets a yes, as in, yes, this is so. And because this card is at the start of the reading, you can also take it as a sort of, yes, this is the situation. Yes, this is how things are flowing. Sometimes this card is also a permission card, as in, yes, we can do something, or yes, something will happen. There's a little bit of that here, but I think not so much. In fact, I think the yes card mostly emphasizes the following cards that come after. And that next card is the Fool, which is starting over. So again, we have a new journey, a new pathway, a new situation. In other words, things are changing. The pattern will be different. But while the Fool card is usually fairly positive, despite the name, because it's usually about seeking knowledge or starting a new journey. In other words, that the Fool is the foolish innocence that young people have when they first start out on life. It can also sometimes, though, this card can be about being foolish or making poor choices. Often in all innocence, again, the kind of poor choices that the kids make when they're first starting out, and they have all the good intentions of the world, but they just don't have enough background to make a correct decision. And I think that may be what we have here, because the next card is the surprise card. Right in the middle, we have, as the nature of destruction, we have money. So we know that money, in both the forms of coins and probably agriculture, are going to be affected. Now, why do I say this? Because the farmer on the card is plowing his fields, and there's the coins of money laying underneath the ground. Even if the farmer never finds that hidden money, he has the wealth of his labor in the form of agriculture if the season goes well. So we have both kinds of wealth in this card. And then the money card is followed directly by, believe it or not, the destruction card again. There really are 40 cards in this deck, and I really did shuffle them very, very well. So this repeat is basically the cards really trying to give us the message. So we have the destruction of money, and altogether so far we have, yes, we have the Fool, and possibly foolish decisions or something the Fool does blindly going on ahead creates the destruction of money. And the final card of the cards in this reading is Now. So the Now card also has harvest images, but this time the farmer, instead of sowing his crop with his plow, plowing his fields and planting, he's reaping the crop that's already been sown. This card gives us a time marker, as well as hinting that some of the destruction of wealth, again, is in the form of agriculture, which would fit given the area we're reading, as well as, I think, actual money or wealth. But mainly, we get this big flashing warning sign saying, warning, warning, danger, destruction of money or wealth is the ultimate outcome of this drought. But wait, there's a bit more in the runes. We have, for runes, we have Laguz, Ansuj, and Othala. And these 3 runes are like almost epic for this sort of reading. Runes tend to be kind of epic in general because they read about great forces, and they're really great for like these kind of macro questions. But this one's in particular, this is one of several we're going to see tonight that are just really kind of epic. Now, what is that first rune? The first rune is Laguz, which is lake or water. Considering a lake in California last week went dry overnight, this rune verifies that the runes and cards they really heard the question. Sometimes the runes and the cards stir things in like this, just to sort of let you know, I hear you, and I am reading about your question, even if some of the things seem a little strange. So destruction involves water. Either it's water destroyed, which you'd get in a drought, or water doing the destruction, which tends to happen especially in California, but also in desert areas after the drought if you get water coming too fast. We can't really tell for sure which this is talking about, but given my childhood in California, as I said, both are possible, just at different times of the potential new cycle. But water is the primary issue here, at least according to the runes. Although I also have to point out that Laguz has a more mystical or esoteric meaning than just water, physical water. It means things are hidden, either actually physically underwater, or emotionally underwater, or even under the subconscious, things that we really don't see or can't see yet, but they're kind of gradually rising to the surface and make their appearance. So we have this pattern of some things coming to light. It's not like the sun card where we saw it full on, but this is kind of that implication that it's up and rising. The Ansuj rune is one of those runes of Odin, and it's translated usually mouth, but what it really means is like communication, in other words, to speak, or the transference of information. This rune suggests that not only water and hidden things are part of the destruction, but the communications, both positive and negative, are part of what is destroyed. In other words, you get communications, infrastructure perhaps, or things like TV, radio, internet, electricity, highways even, commerce, power grids. They're all going to be part of this destruction, or at least inhibited. They're affected in some way. And again, I have to remember from my childhood, both the raging fires or the massive flooding taking out, chunks of things. And that's, I think, kind of what is part of the destruction here. It could also simply be that lies and deceptions are continuing to hide something about the water. Something that somebody doesn't want people to know about the water, or the water table, or the lakes in general. Or this hidden situation is just making it really hard to understand the real issue. This is confusing. It isn't straightforward. It is complicated. And there's a lot being obscured. The destruction itself, though, I believe is aimed at that Othala rune. Othala's the rune of the homeland. The rune is especially powerful for me in this reading because I was born in California. So Othala is literally my homeland. And the Othala rune is also one of those kind of runes for Odin. It's associated with that particular deity. And it's got a lot of mystical implications. It's sometimes in current events readings used to signify Greater Germany, but I don't think that has anything to do with that here. But that was just basically because the Germans, even long before World War II, were associating Othala with the fatherland. But if you transfer that to California or Nevada or the Southwest, the place where people live, the homeland, basically the destruction affects the homeland. And that's really very, very serious and kind of disturbing. So while I don't think the entire southwestern California will be destroyed, we're not looking, I don't think, not at this reading anyway, at some kind of massive earthquake that tears it off and throws it into the sea. Water, or the lack of water, and destruction itself will impact and affect this homeland where people live and could actually destroy parts of it. So that is something to remember. Again, we still don't know for sure whether it's water or lack of water or both, but it's definitely water is the pivotal thing. So I decided, okay, well, let's try another question, because we still don't know which way we're going here. Who or what is the liar? I asked this about the destruction, but who or what is the liar came later. This is my next question. I did a full card and rune spread on it because, and then I followed it by several shorter questions, seeing if we could finally dig down using only the runes, because the runes are so much more useful for these kinds of really epic questions. But first, I really want to see if I can get more information on this court jester who's shown on the liar card. The liar card has this short court jester. He's dancing in front of an audience. He's holding a mask with a smile on it, but he's frowning behind it. And he's also holding a doll, and the doll is obscuring this guy behind a curtain. And he's trying to keep the audience from looking at the curtain. So you've got not only lies here, but you've got distraction. And when I ask about the nature of this liar, or this distraction, or whatever it is, the first card I got is the Voyage. I wasn't sure how to read this card, and I'm still not totally certain. But I'm going to, for once, go by the picture on the card itself as much as the name or the usual energy. The Voyage card shows an old-fashioned sailing ship of the sort that put into western ports during the early 19th century with all the sails and, the whaling ships and everything. That particularly made me think of San Francisco, but they went into the ports of Long Beach and everywhere else, Alaska, the whole coastal area. But they show this card also shows the sea itself, and it shows land, and it shows a compass above the land. It's like a map. And the ship is voyaging along the coast on the card. So again, there's those hints of salt water, ships, cargo, trade, ports of call that could all be affected. The land also shows mouths of rivers, freshwater rivers going into the sea. So water is a really, really important image on this card, as well as the ship itself. Usually this card in a reading is about actual travel, like a person's going somewhere or not. It can also be about the direction you're going in life, or the voyage of life, continuing the journey. And there are hints of that here, because the next card is, once again, destruction. Remember, we have 40 cards. I'm shuffling them every single time. And destruction. So now we have the voyage destroyed. And the voyage of destruction, followed by the card for home. Remember homeland? Well, now we have the home card. This card is depicted showing a little cozy house, little cozy living room with a fire burning. There's a cat on the map, the table set for tea. In other words, the voyage of destruction for the homes where people live or they feel safe. The card that comes after this is the death card, which is different from destruction, because the death card, well, it can be about the actual death of people or animals or beings. It's also about rebirth. So it's often about the final ending of one situation, but also the start of another. Again, we have that potential for the new cycle, but we also have the final ending of something else. Now, the last card I picked here is the Beauty card, which suggests something wonderful rising from the ashes. What I honestly can tell from this is that if the lie is about the destruction itself happening, or about the ability of something wonderful to come out of the ashes, it's really confusing, because if I hadn't asked what the lie was, I would think these were just cards describing the situation. And they still could be, because once in a while, I've noticed when I do these really long, complicated, in-depth readings, the cards start repeating themselves. So we have to keep that in mind. But I also think that I want to go over the runes before I make a final decision on that. And the runes are once again a Thala for the homeland. So we have both home, but we have homeland. And Tiwaj, which is the card for judgment, law, karma, etc. It's shaped like a spear. and it is a very powerful card in this sort of reading. So, while I recognize the elements of this reading, it's still leaving me, even with the runes, unsure what the lie is exactly. But I also have to remember that the liar card can be about distraction. So it could be these are the things the liar is trying to distract people from. Are these potentials for distraction, a potential to hit at the home, and the other issues involved here, and difficulties with shipping or the voyage? It's a bit early to tell, though, as situations impacted by the drought, on their own, the cards make sense. You know, like I said earlier, they make perfect sense if that's what you're looking at. So I may revisit this whole thing in a few months and get some more clarity, especially on this one, because I'm starting to really feel, after 24 hours of reflection, that this is as much about distraction as it is about outright lying. In other words, people are just simply not being told the truth about the elements flagged here, rather than the things themselves are a lie. But we'll have to wait and see. I decided not to stop here, though, and I did a few quick more rune picks on the destruction itself. This is because, as I pointed out earlier, runes are really good for reading these kind of epic, bigger-than-people forces. I thought, well, maybe we can at least see if what we're facing this winter is further drought, flooding, or some of both. With a serious El Nino projected to occur, heavy flooding might be likely from a purely scientifically based educated guess type of prediction. And what follows, what actually happens, is anybody's guess. But, you know, if I were just going by what I know of science, I would say we're going to have really bad flooding, at least over the winter. So my first quickie question was, for the runes, will the destruction occur by flooding? And I got algae and Issa. A nice, vague non-answer. I got two runes, El Hajj and Issa, as I said, basically elk, which can be protection, or a mighty force, including sort of divine intervention, or even a person reaching up asking for divine help, and Issa, which is ice. So we could either have protection from ice, or a really big covering of ice, like an epic layer of ice. The elk or moose, as it's known in North America, may also signify that herbivores such as deer, or even cattle that rely on grasses and plants to survive the winter, may have some issues. The rune itself looks like stag's antlers as they go into their full growth, and I actually was getting images of deer breaking the ice in the mountains, so this could be really a harbinger of some rather harsh weather. It's hard to tell, though, whether this is because there is no rune for snow exactly, at least not in the Elder Futhark, you know, whether this is a warning about ice or snow that goes with it. Because snow would be really good. You know, if we got, even if it came with flooding, snow would increase the snowpack, both for California and Nevada, and that would mean the water table would help recover. But we've got this ice thing, which is a little hard to tell. And ice is the opposite of running water. So despite the fact that my monkey mind thinks severe damage from flooding is likely, that's kind of what I would expect just reading and what I know and from experience, I have to say that this combination suggests at least protection from the ice or ice flows, which in California in particular makes sense. But, you know, this may be another one where we just have to watch and see, and I'm going to have to revisit it, because we may be talking about conditions in the mountains, or it could be something more hypothetically stuck, because the other thing Issa can mean is something getting stuck and unmoving. So it may be that the protection or the situation or the prayers are simply unmoved. It does nothing really happens, nothing much changes. So I tried again. Will the destruction be by continued drought, flood, or fire? And I got Lagouge, Hagalage, and Penage, or the epic runes of water, hail, and fire. Since the above was so unclear, the first reading, I went for one last pick of the runes, and they are epic, as I just said. If nothing else, it do give us a glimpse as to what may be in store in weather for this winter, especially in California, but possibly other areas as well. As I said, I just keep being drawn to California because that's where I'm from, and I feel a greater pull towards that area. Now, the runes that I mentioned, let me break them down. First again, we have Lagouge again, which is water, which we already knew about. But it's also lake, but but it can be sometimes ocean deep water as a general rule rather than running water. But this also suggests that flooding is likely to occur, at least there will be some serious problems with deep bodies of water. Now, again, this is a little hard to be certain of because water is, in fact, the problem in a drought. But I think that if the floods do not come, there's much more likely to be in the form of lakes that continue to dry up. This rain may, be about, water that essentially blows away or disappears. But it feels more like the action of water to me, at least in some areas. I don't know if the whole area is going to flood, but I've kept having images of floods and landslides even before I did this reading, so that could be coloring it. I have to say that as a caveat. Maybe my mind just interfering. But the fact that water is first in a question about floods and fire or drought, we definitely, I think that the water is going to play here. Perhaps there'll be flooding and even spilling of water, like I said, in some areas, but not in others. And that may be why this is confusing, because we're not just reading for, say, Los Angeles County, or just Reno, Nevada, or just Oakland, or even, the mountains in the Sierra Nevada. We've got a whole area here. So this may be the runes trying to break things down into kind of what is an overall pattern. Now, the next rune is the hail rune. It's Hagalaj, and that suggests severe storms and weather, or something striking out of the sky. The sort of thing that strikes and strikes hard and is not necessarily beneficial or helpful. Hagalaj is usually only helpful when it breaks a bad pattern, which it could do. That could be the positive side of Hagalaj, if it actually breaks the drought for a while. But it goes with the Isa ice rune in terms of potentially being colder or indicating cold or stormy weather, especially in the mountains. Again, increased snowfall would not surprise me, but unfortunately it really does feel like the more destructive forms of weather, like ice storms, especially in Southern California, or even the deserts, so I'm getting this image of hail, actual strong hail falling. Hagalaj can, of course, we've seen Hagalaj before. We saw it in the last show where it felt like something that was coming that might be very destructive economically, that would probably be kind of a bolt out of the blue. And another show I'll go over some of the things that may or may not have been. We've had a little more time. But this one feels partly symbolic, but it also feels like actual real hail or actual real things hitting from the sky. Finally, though, we get Kenaj, which is the main rune for fire. We have other runes for fire. There's several, but this is like real fire. It can also mean boil, like a boil that really hurts and burns fiery when it's rising up. And this hints at some potential for volcanic activity even. I sometimes call this rune Sideways Volcano. I rather doubt it's going to be serious enough to affect the weather. It's possible. I mean, in California itself, maybe something else somewhere will affect it, and that could be what this is hinting at. It could also be talking about the El Nino, which is out there kind of, which is not itself fiery, but changes the temperatures of the sea and the currents. So, but it's more likely about the potential for more heat, or at least lightning strikes and fires happening before the end of this time period. And given that this is the 1st of October when many fires occur, we've got another month or two actually of the fire season in California to watch as part of this reading. So we may be talking about, even though it comes later in the sequence, it's possible that it's already talking about what could occur sooner rather than later. Usually things kind of go sequentially, but they may not for various reasons. But I have a gut feeling that on some level, this water, hail, and fire is a sequence that suggests that even if we get rains and storms that come this winter, the heat is likely to turn into spring. And that would fit with this idea of things seem to be changing. People sort of, there's a lot of destruction from the water. People kind of sit back and go, oh, it's changed. The pattern has changed. But maybe it hasn't really. Now, we're going to need to go longer than spring of 2016 to know if that's true or not. And I'm going to probably take another look at this at the end, at least by the end of next spring, by the beginning of next summer, because the situation is complicated and hard to be certain of, but we want to know if the rains come back, if it's a permanent change or of cycle or not. But to summarize here, kind of what I'm thinking is that there soon will be what it seems to be at least a new pattern or situation that occurs in all or part of the drought-stricken area. Things may seem as if they'll be okay for a while. This probably means we get some rains coming back, but it's probably not the case in the long term, at least not right away. And surprisingly, money and communications may be among the things most affected. I don't know if people will recognize it at first, but it's going to be a fairly large issue, and the main one they flag as being destroyed. And, I have to wonder, given all the home cards, also, if some of what is destroyed essentially is the value of real estate, the value of companies, the value of investment, and because communications are also upset and unraveled, I even get the sense that maybe some companies, like some of the IT companies and things, moving away may not be permanent, but I get this feeling that that's part of what the money problem is. We get epic energies like fire, water, and hail, and ice that will play pivotal roles in the direction things are shifting to, and as they occur in the birth of this changing cycle. There are hints also in this reading of judgment, or at least legal issues that will need to be worked out in order for the homeland to recover. This judgment is more like terms of what was done before is now affecting what happens now. So it may not even be judgment in the sense like, I'm not saying that, the gods are judging California or Nevada for their gambling casinos or something. It's not that kind of judgment. It's more because decisions were made on how to allocate water or how to do farming 100 years ago. They may be playing out in what happens now. And there's really very little that can be done about that because it's already been put in play. But hopefully, because we have all these things, because we have that beauty card, we can hope that things will in fact rise out of the ashes. And I think that they will, but I'm not going to declare that things will be over in 2016. It may have changed, but I think that the cycle may go back to the way to continue. We'll have to be that Kenage rune, but I will do another reading then, and we'll just have to see. Meanwhile, I would be ready for some pretty wild and cold weather if I was living in any part of California, but especially Southern California or the mountains or Nevada, because I just get this feeling that there's going to be some, I get this image of the sort of flash of orange trees and lemon trees with them putting the smudge pots on them and trying to keep them warm. So I would not be at all surprised if there are at least a few days in this winter when places like Los Angeles and Long Beach and that southern area have actually some real freezing weather, if not actual ice storms. So anyway, we'll just wait and see on that. And that's kind of it for this reading. This has been part 1. And in a moment, stay tuned, go get yourself a cup of tea, listen to the 1 minute of commercials, and we'll be back with part 2 here at Cat's Eye on the Future. You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages. Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today? We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future. Back to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future. Well, I had intended to do a few lightweight and fun questions that were on the forums, after that California drought one because it was so intense and so heavy. However, current events have caught up again, and as I am recording here on October 1st, 2015, in the last 24 hours, the huge story has broken about President Putin, who we've seen in readings before, is now bombing Syria, and at least allegedly told the U.S. he was going to do this on about 1 hour's notice and told them to stay out of the way yesterday morning. At this point in time, it seems like the Kremlin has given Putin permission, as if he needs it, but he's given him permission to send ground troops into the area of the Middle East, particularly Syria. Other countries, such as Iran and Saudi Arabia, also look ready to get in the middle of this particular complicated mess, but not on the same side, or sides, because there seems to be more than two, but a little bit more on that later, or perhaps another reading. So there was a great poll that came up this afternoon on a different forum. This is more of a political forum that I'm on called Time Bomb. And a member posted what's called a poll where people can vote. And the question was, do you think the U.S. will be at war with Russia within the next 6 months? This based on, what's going on in the last 24 hours. And I thought a version of this question would be great for the second half of the show. Even if we don't get a clear answer, we may gain some insights into the way things are heading. Remember that the cards and runes tend to read potentials for things that happen, and the energies around them most of the time. They don't usually flag an exact event. Sometimes they will, but more often it's this, I get a psychic flash focusing on the cards that such an event may happen, like my vision of the potential vision of the smudge pots in the last reading. Or I may make an educated guess, like El Nino is happening, and therefore it's more likely to flood. I'll always try to tell my listeners which type it is, but given that caution that we're reading more energies than exact answers, let's go see how the reading came out. First, the original formal question is here. Will the United States of America and the Russian Federation be directly at war with each other within the next 6 months? That is, from October 2015 to around April 2017. Notice I said directly at war. The question we are asking here is about direct confrontation where Russia and the U.S. are enemies and fighting each other, not just one more check into the great game of playing war by proxy, which goes on in the Middle East and all over the world, off and on for hundreds of years. That's already happening, which is one thing that makes this reading a little difficult and confusing, but we're going to try it anyway. Because past events like Vietnam, I didn't even use the words declared war, because for the last 60 years or so, many wars, especially on the part of the United States, have never been formally declared by the President or Congress, but yet they are really hot wars. But okay, that given, what do the cards and runes have to say? Let's get on with it about the potential for real and direct war. Well, I'm going to quickly review these cards again and put my take on them. The first card is friendship, which I believe represents the last few years which Russia and the U.S. have attempted to be friends. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, there has been this kind of on-again, off-again attempt to be, the great brothers of the North, which I use that term intentionally because, funny enough, even Nostradamus writes about these two brothers from the North, whose symbol each is the eagle, who are friends, but not really friends. They're friends for a time, and then they essentially become unfriends. And then they go to war with each other. Now, for an in-depth look at this particular prophecy, rather than my try to bumble about with what Nostradamus may or may not have said, I suggest that my listeners order the excellent book, for which I get nothing. I'm just plugging the book because I like it. It's about Nostradamus and this topic, and it's by scholar John Hogue, and it's called The New Cold War. For now, let's just say this card of the friendship echoes that prophecy in a very spine-chilling way. Complete with the unknown elements that occur in the prophecy, but in the card, they're in the form of this unseen person coming into the picture for their pint of ale. So we have this unknown energy heading towards the table where the friends seem to be talking happily and getting along. It's like something that may bust in and create problems. The card right after this friendship is beauty, that we know from the first of the show. Now, the beauty card could be a symbol for a beautiful friendship, which I think partly is what it was here. It was this beautiful friendship. Also, it could be a female influence or even a female leader in this sort of current events reading. Someone like, say, Angela Merkel or the Queen of England or Hillary Clinton. I'm not saying it's any of those women, but they could tend to appear in the beauty reading, especially a woman of power. Now, she's standing next to the Sun card, which is usually a highly positive card, but the Sun also tends to come up when new things come to light or things that were hidden are now revealed. And they're not just sort of kind of gently revealed like they are with the Moon card or with Lagos. This is like being caught in a strong light of day. You just cannot avoid them. It can be very harsh, very desert-like, and basically it even has hints of the Middle East. And that's how I'm reading it here, this kind of harsh revelation. That's because the next card is our friend the Liar card again. Remember, 40 cards, we're still getting them even in this reading. But this time they're a little different. So we have the Liar card, and I think this time is this, what it's about is this previously beautiful friendship is disrupted, destroyed by some sort of lie or falsehood that comes to light. Something that, a foundation that was false, and it just revealed in this harsh sunlight. It may do so partly because of something said, done, or performed by such a female leader, or at least someone who wields that sort of emotional and more feminine power. If it's, I'm not saying it is, it could be something totally unrelated to a person, but it feels like it may be kind of attached to something very emotional, very profound, and very people that feel really strongly. And something that people just can't get beyond. It's not something that you can rationally talk away. It's not that this deck is very oriented toward male energy being rational and female energy being very emotional. That's not necessarily true, but that's how the deck is arranged. So again, I get this very, whatever this thing is, people react to it very powerfully, and just not necessarily with their heads. We also have to remember that both the United States and even more so Russia have female identifications to a degree. So the Great Lady may in fact be Lady Liberty, or more likely, the motherland, because again, Russia has this very powerful feminine identification. The final card in this sequence suggests it's more likely there will be a return to a frozen or Cold War relations during the next 6 months. All-out war is not impossible, it's just less likely, and we're literally looking at that new Cold War at the moment, which is why another reason I recommend the book. The card I'm talking about is a prison card, which it shows a prisoner trapped behind bars, sitting in jail and unable to act. However, this card can also be about being trapped in a situation you can't get out of, and I have to say that because of the runes. So whereas just the card reading looks like totally a return to the cold, it starts in friendship, ends in kind of this cold jail, Cold War. And the runes are Nadish, Tiwaj, and Gabo, and they hint that such a trap is possible, but they provide both the warning and a potential solution if the parties are willing to take it. There's a warning out there to them of something bad that could happen, but there's also a way out suggested. Now, why do I say that? Because Nadish is another rune for fire, but in this case it's the need fire. It's the most ancient kind of fire, the type formed in desperation by rubbing two sticks together to make a fire or an exploding flame. Tiwaj, again, looks like a spear and is associated with the old father, sky god, Tu, who's the closest thing in the Middle East to the idea of closest thing in the Norse had to this Middle Eastern idea of a stern father god. And he was also, in the last reading, he's about justice, law, even sometimes real estate, but it's justice in the old clan sense that includes tribal warfare and revenge, as well as setting things right by contract or negotiation. As I said in the California reading, there are hints of karma, of cause and effect in this rune too. Even if the karma is a very Eastern concept rather than a Norse idea, even the Norse understood that what you do will set the foundation for what comes next, and that's the kind of karma that we're talking about with Tiwaj. And finally we have Gabo, which is literally the gift or exchange again. This exchange can be positive or negative, as we can see what is gifted. The important clue here is that it is a transition or a transaction that affects both sides, and it affects them equally because you have the X shape of the rune itself. Now, my hunch looking at this is that the next 6 months are like a pivot point or a tipping point in this friendship, relationship, exchange between the U.S. and Russia. The two parties can choose to use this time of desperation and great need that's brought up by the need fire to go to sort of a modern all thing. The all thing being where the Norse got together once a year and they had all their lawsuits and they passed all their laws and they argued things out and tried to solve them in ways that were short of warfare or, clan revenge. So they could either like essentially go to the bargaining table and, try democracy or diplomacy, really, to work things out and exchange use that to exchange gifts essentially, and you get what, if not exactly total peace, at least that exchange lowers the hostilities. I give you this and you give me that and we work things out, and there's a potential for at least a stand down or a stand back for a while. More disturbingly, though, the two nations can choose to continue to fan the flames of that need fire and that desperation that's already existing in the area and on the topic, and then they enter into this T-wash sphere of direct or indirect warfare, which could result in an exchange, in which the nature of Nausage, because it's part of the exchange, has the potential for extremely serious, if not something actually nuclear in nature. A lot of rune readers that use them for modern times see Nausage as part of that rubbing the sticks together of the atomic explosion, and I really feel that that's a potential here. This is not quite, again, a direct answer. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card for me as a reader either, that I don't have an exact answer. What this reading suggests is that the question doesn't have a direct answer yet, because the human beings involved in making the decisions that will make for the ultimate answer are at a pivot or tipping point, and they haven't made up their minds. They have this prophetic choice that they can go one way or the other. They can choose to negotiate and stand down at least for a while, though I suspect if they do, they will again get kind of just trapped in this prison card. They're no longer professing friendship that they had before. They can, but at least they're kind of stuck. At least it's kind of, again, kind of back to balance, even if it's kind of a cold balance. Or they can choose to let things continue to build and exchange with each other in war, which would be highly dangerous. I was disturbed enough by these last words to do one more quick reading on this with the second direct question on this. My question was, will there be a nuclear exchange as part of this conflict set off by anyone involved, not restricting it to the two larger nuclear powers? So we're not just talking Russia and the U.S. here. They're probably like they're there as big players in the background, but it's basically just, will there be a nuclear device that goes off? What I got for cards was the father. The father card is where you have a man who's obviously teaching a young boy how to shoot a bow and arrow, and he's standing directly over him, and he's showing him which way to point, and he's telling the young man to shoot this way. We don't know whether this card is about a father teaching his son how to go hunting, or whether it's a man teaching his son how to go shoot the enemy, either in defense or offense. It's got all those things. And in this particular thing, I think it's about warfare, because that's the question we're asking about. So we have the image of the father showing his child, or perhaps over a country that is like in the position of father over a smaller country, telling them what to do. This suggests that if such a thing as a nuclear device going off did happen, it would be in the direction of this greater power in the conflict, but possibly also performed by another player. In other words, even if the U.S. or Russia or China had anything to do with the actual event, it would actually be launched by Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, or even say ISIS or another terror group, splinter group, if they could get a hold of such a device. The prison card is right in the middle of this one. I only did 3 cards on this one, and it hints such a potential may be stopped in this case, or trapped, as we know has happened in the past, where the big players have sometimes put pressure on allied states not to do something. And I'm thinking right now of, I believe there was a time when the U.S. Pretty much stopped Israel from bombing something. I don't think it actually was using a nuke, but they wanted to go do something, and the U.S. refused to give them some codes or something to allow it to happen. That kind of background pressure, don't do that, or do that, is very much a play here. Now, the final card in the skills, which almost makes you wonder if the reason things get trapped and are unable to proceed, in other words, if someone or some various ones want to use a nuclear device, they're not able to because of a lack of skills that prevents them from going all the way. Or it could be the sort of entrapment that forces someone's hand, almost at gunpoint. But I think it's more likely that such an action may be desired on the part of someone, that they want to do this, but they can't act and pull it off because they're trapped in some way. And partly they're really likely trapped because of this lack of skill or information to carry it out, which to me personally, this is just an educated guess, sounds more like ISIS, who has said they want to get a nuclear device, or some other smaller, non-officially nuclear state like Saudi Arabia, or one of the others that don't officially have them, Iran, that is almost there, but just, can't quite do it, and they can't pull it off, and they cannot get the information from the father figure who's actually pulling their strings either. They just won't go along with it. Now the runes are once again, Gabo again, potential for exchange, in this case, nuclear exchange, because that was the question. So we know this time Gabo was saying, yes, we are talking about a nuclear exchange. And we get Thurisage. Thurisage is the giant thorn or prick, that possible pinprick that pops the balloon and does not allow for such, that either does allow for such an action or does not allow for such an action. This rune suggests that there is a potential trigger out there for the use of such a device, and that trigger may occur, but it doesn't signify that it will occur or that it is successful. Finally, we have once again Berkano, birch tree or birth. There's the potential for such an exchange, and such a thorn sticking in the side of the situation. But it could also lead to enough disruption or desperation for other types of outcome, this birth of a new situation, especially if the nuclear option simply is trapped and does not occur, which is what we will all hope for. I finally asked for the nature of the Berkano rune, and I got El-Haj. In other words, what is the nature of the birth? What is the birth? What is the new thing? And this is the elk or protection again, sometimes seen as a person holding their hands in prayer and asking for the intercession of the divine. So now we have this strong indication of what could prevent the use of such a device, or at least intervene in the outcome if such a device is used or attempted to be used. There is essentially a force of protection, perhaps on behalf of the Father in the first card, which could be either divinity itself, like as in the Father, as in God or a creator, or a larger country, possibly a father-identified one, or in this case just a larger entity that helps modify the outcome. So even if something goes off, it is affected in such a way that there's a lot more protection than there could have been. To summarize this mess, or this rather complicated reading, energy-wise, this is still too open to change. I suspect a macro question of the choice between war or the negotiating table will influence the outcome of will a nuclear device be used here. And remember, there's a lot of other kinds of horrible things that could be used that are not nuclear, and I'm not reading about those. So just because we may be off the hook, or hopefully have some intervention that keeps us from having to deal with a nuclear device anytime real soon, it doesn't prohibit some other things happening. But at the moment, it looks less likely the nuclear device will be used, at least this winter. It looks strongly to me like someone, individual or state player, will want to use such a device, but will hopefully not be able to. Either because they're trapped by the decisions of stronger wills or allies, one or the other, or because they don't have the skills to do it for themselves. And I think there's probably both issues going on. And on the one hand, they're possibly both Russia and the US or China, the big players, none of them really want this to get out of hand and go nuclear. So they're not helping in any way, and the individual player has no ability to do it quite on their own yet. Thankfully, there seems to be a certain amount of divine, or at least powerful protection that's in force right now on the issue. It may not be enough to prevent anything from happening if some people are determined to go in that direction, but they're pushing strongly against the tide here, and hopefully such a dire outcome will, if it does happen, it'll provide a new opportunity, and there'll be some protection even in the destruction, essentially. So even if the bubble's blown, it's a more limited exchange. It should hopefully not get out of hand, at least not at this time. My hunch here is that there will not be a nuclear exchange, at least not before April of next year, but it won't be for lack of trying on the part of one or more players, which is going to keep us in the news. We're going to get rumors, all this stuff, and it's going to be this kind of rough, scary time. And we can't be certain, we can't just sit back and totally relax, but we can hopefully, be kind of calmer about it, because it's very unlikely that it will succeed. Larger players, as I said, will try to prevent this, along possibly with the unseen hand of something from elsewhere. Like the California reading, this one is complicated, and made more so by the fact that human beings are seriously involved in this one, as well as the forces of the weather, which, like in the other reading, weather influences war very, very often, as do things like illness and agriculture and other things, but weather in particular may be some influence as well this winter. But most likely at this point is a continued war by proxy that gets trapped and bogged down, with the former friends, the U.S. and Russia, now trapped in their positions come late spring. So that's really what I'm seeing, is this kind of headlock. What happens next? Just like California, we have to wait and see. If I got this totally wrong and, serious war breaks out tomorrow or next week or whatever, I will try to review this reading to see where I went wrong, because usually I find that the cards and runes are correct, but I don't always get the message and understand it properly. I think I've got it pretty much right here, but this is such a changing situation that I will go back and review it if things change, or I may even do simply an update reading if things really get tense, because there's this kind of, I get this feeling almost of the metronome going back and forth, and sometimes it goes faster and faster and faster, and then sometimes it stops, and we don't really know what when it's going to unwind. So there's that potential. The good news, however, is because things are at a pivot point, the concentration and sending a positive energy towards the more protective and the peaceful and the gift exchange peace, rather, by good-minded people. We can do this in meditation, prayer, and direct action. They actually may make a difference here. A lot of times events just kind of happen and we feel really powerless, but particularly with those father images and that sort of that divine influence, that divine hand, I think this is a good time for, even if all you can do is meditate or pray about it, it's probably something positive you can do. And I suggest that my listeners do try this if they feel so moved. Times of tipping points and potentials are when the future can go either way, so we should try to push it in a positive one, not just, of course, in the macro sense, but remember, these energies may play on us as well, which is probably why we saw some of the same energies in the reading for the drought as we did for the war. So remember, this is a time when there's a lot of potential for gifting and exchange, and you want positive gifting and exchange of good energy. You want to avoid trying to be trapped if you can. And if you do get kind of trapped, you want to try to make, change your prison into your home. You want to create that into a positive space instead of a negative one. Okay, well, I think that's enough for now. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty wrung out after 2 intensive reading shows. Hopefully next time the current events will let us do something a little lighter, either an interview or some less dire questions. As always, if you have questions or topics you'd like heard on the air, please just write me at melodyreader@gmail.com. That's Melody with an I. I love hearing from my listeners, and you sometimes provide the most interesting topics of all. So tonight, however, I think I'm going to say goodbye for now, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week here at Cat's Eye on the Future. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future. the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.